The most ancient known document concerning the fast preparatory to the feast of Easter comes from Gal. It dates from the end of the 2nd century and has as its author St. Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyons. The Paschal controversy, stirred up between Pope Victor and the bishops of Asia, gave occasion for it. St. Irenaeus observes that the question concerned not only the day of celebration of Easter, but also the fast connected with it. On this latter point, the doctors were likewise in disagreement. He says, quote, "Some thought that one ought to fast one day, others 2, others 3, and others again gave to their fast a duration of 40 hours." End quote. Eusebius has transmitted this text to us, which Rufinus, in his translation, distorted. The word 40 made him think of a fast of 40 days, which is evidently the discipline of his own time that suggested such misunderstanding to him. By combining various passages of Tertullian in his work on fasting, we can determine the African usage at the beginning of the 3rd century. The Montanists fasted 2 weeks per year, except Saturday and Sunday, and Tertullian reproaches the Catholics, the psychics as he calls them, for not imitating them. He says, quote, "How limited is the extent of our interdiction of meats. 2 weeks of fasting in the year, and not the whole of these, because the Sabbath and the Lord's Day we accept." End quote. The Catholics fasted continuously on Good Friday and Holy Saturday, by reason of the command of the Lord, because of the removal of the bridegroom. This is, if one believes Tertullian, the only fast properly imposed by the Church. Nevertheless, the psychics also observed certain kinds of half-fasts on the station days, that is to say Wednesday and Friday in general, contenting themselves with bread and water, according to each one's discretion. Tertullian says, quote, "Behold, I impeach you of fasting besides on the Paschal day, in which the bridegroom was taken away, and interposing the half-fast of stations, and you, I find, sometimes living on bread and water, when it has seemed meet to each so to do." End quote. St. Irenaeus, in speaking to us in the divergences that existed on this point in the Christian communities in the time of Popes Anicetus, Hyginus, Telesphorus, and Sixtus, according to Eusebius, reports nothing precise to us concerning the discipline of the Roman Church at that period. The constitution by which Pope Telesphorus is said to have established a fast of 7 weeks before Easter is a false decretal of the 6th century. The 10th homily of Origen on Leviticus has been alleged to mark the usage of Alexandria in regard to fasting at the beginning of the 3rd century. He writes, quote, "We have 40 days consecrated to fasting," end quote. But this testimony is without value. The homily exists only in the Latin revision of Rufinus, who therein introduced, voluntarily or not, in speaking of a Lent of 40 days, a custom that he had before his eyes at the end of the 4th century. The authentic usage of Alexandria is attested by a letter of its bishop St. Dionysius, addressed to Basilides, in which one sees that the Paschal fast did not then exceed 1 week. Dionysius seems to proceed from the idea that the fast of 6 days must be regarded as an ancient and general rule, but he notes that there is much diversity in his observances. Even among those who fast the 6 days, not all do so in one stretch and without interruption. Some fast only 2 days in succession, others 3, others 4. There are even some who do not submit themselves for a whole day to the strict and absolute fast. Finally, some fast neither little nor much on the first 4 days and think that they are doing something magnificent by consecrating only Good Friday and Holy Saturday. He says, quote, "When the Paschal fast is to be broken depends on the precise hour of our Savior's resurrection, and this was not certainly to be known from the 4 evangelists. Therefore, they who have not fasted Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before Easter do no great thing if they fast Friday and Saturday, and so till past 3 on Easter morning. But they who have fasted the whole 6 days are not to be blamed if they break their fast at midnight. Some do not fast any of these days." End quote. The Didascalia, which dates from the 3rd century, is a witness to Syrian usage. It orders fasting from Monday of Holy Week, 6 days completely until the night following Saturday, and this is counted as a week. This fixing of a week apparently derives from the Jewish custom mentioned in Exodus 12 verse 8 and Deuteronomy 16:3, according to which the Hebrews at the time of the Passover were to nourish themselves for 7 days on the bread of affliction. The first Christians, who lived for some time under the regime of Jewish practices, carried this 7-day fast over into the usage of the church. But since Christ had indicated that his disciples were to fast only during the removal of the bridegroom, it was necessary to make the fast coincide with the days that preceded the resurrection. According to this document, the Pharisees had already planned from Monday to put Christ to death, and therefore this was the beginning of the removal of the bridegroom. Moreover, it also forbids fasting on Sunday, saying, quote, "For he who afflicts himself on Sunday commits a sin," end quote. And therefore the 6 days of fasting counted as 7, that is to say, a week. The fast did not involve the same rigor each day. It says, quote, "From the 10th day, which is Monday, you shall fast and you shall eat only bread, salt and water at the 9th hour, until Thursday. On Friday and Saturday you shall fast completely and taste nothing," end quote. By this distinction, the Didascalia itself seems to recognize that the true removal of the bridegroom absolutely begins only on Friday. That St. Leo and St. Jerome were mistaken as to the origin of Lent clearly results from the silence of the fathers of the first 3 centuries. We have already observed that the testimonies drawn from Pope Telesphorus, St. Irenaeus, and Origen are apocryphal texts. The same may be said of the text of Pseudo-Ignatius. Tertullian even clearly suggests that the Lenten fast did not exist in his time, when he reproaches the Psychics, or the Catholics, for observing only the Easter fast and some other half-fasts, whereas the Montanists fasted several weeks. The Didascalia of the Apostles gives the same impression. No document is known that mentions Lent before the 4th century. The 5th canon of the Council of Nicaea recommends that bishops hold 2 synods per year to determine the fate of the excommunicated, and it sets the date before the first of these synods before what it calls the 40 days. It does not specify what exercises characterize this period of the ecclesiastical year. Dom Duchesne says, quote, "Among the practices of these holy weeks, fasting naturally held an important place, though it differed greatly from one country to another. One can follow in the festal letters of St. Athanasius the progress of the Lenten observance in Egypt. At the beginning, St. Athanasius speaks of the time of Lent and of the week of fasting. Later he speaks of the quote-unquote fast of Lent and fast of Holy Week of Easter." End quote. The number 40 was obviously inspired by the memory of the Savior's 40 days in the desert, but from the outset 2 practical questions arose. First, how should this 40-day period be combined with Holy Week, with the already existing Paschal fast? And second, what should the Lenten fast consist of? The Christian churches responded differently to these questions. At Antioch, and in all the churches influenced by it, Holy Week was not included in the 40 days. They were placed side by side and coordinated with one another. St. John Chrysostom says in his 30th homily on Genesis, quote, "Behold, we have at last reached the end of the holy 40 days and completed the voyage of the fast, and by God's grace we touch port. Now that we have come to the great week, we must press the course of the fast more than ever." End quote. The apostolic constitutions, dating from the end of the 4th century and reflecting Syrian usage, make the distinction between the 2 periods even clearer. It says, quote, "After the time of the Epiphany, one must observe the fast of Lent. But let this fast be celebrated before the fast of Easter. When this fast is ended, Holy Week of Easter begins, during which you shall all fast with fear and trembling." End quote. What characterizes the usage of the Church of Antioch and the Eastern churches in general is not so much the distinction between Lent and Holy Week as the duration of these 2 periods. Zosiman, the historian, declares that the Church of Constantinople and the neighboring nations as far as Phoenicia observed 7 weeks of fasting. But the churches following this usage fasted only 5 days per week. Sunday and Saturday, except Holy Saturday, were exempt from Lenten abstinence. Thus, it was only quote-unquote 5 days according to St. Basil in his work on fasting. Thus, the total number of days devoted to fasting amounted to only 36. In Alexandria, the bishops of that city also maintained a distinction between Lent and the Paschal fast, but they reduced the 2 combined periods to 6 weeks. Most Egyptians continued to fast only during Holy Week. During his stay in Rome in 340 and subsequent years, St. Athanasius was reproached for this. He complains of this in a note appended to his festal letter of 341, dated from Rome. This note is addressed to his friend Serapion, who in his absence directed the churches of Egypt. He strongly urges him to enforce the fast among the Egyptians, saying that they are being mocked by everyone. From then on, the regulation regularly mentions the Lenten fast and Holy Week. In the festal letter of 347, it is formally declared that, quote-unquote, "Whoever despises the observance of Lent shall not celebrate Easter." The reproaches that St. Athanasius received during his stay in Rome in 340 clearly indicate that Roman usage at the time included a Lenten fast. Yet one should not attach too precise a meaning to the term 40 days in regard specifically to fasting. Socrates, a church historian early on, is astonished that certain churches which fast only 3 weeks or even 15 days can even speak of a 40-day period, just as do those which extend their abstinence to 6 or 7 weeks. St. John Chrysostom makes the same remark. Whatever the duration of the Roman Lenten fast in the 4th century was, it is certain that in the 5th century, it extended to 6 weeks. St. Pope Leo I expressly says that it is 40 days, and even claims that this is from the Apostles, saying, quote, "The apostolic institution may be fulfilled by fasting for 40 days, end quote. In his letter to Decentius, Pope Innocent I advocated obligatory Saturday fasting for all weeks of the year. St. Augustine, whose attention was drawn to this obligation, expressly notes that it was a custom particular to the Church of Rome and a few others. There is therefore no reason to doubt that the Roman Lenten fast included Saturday of each week. Thus, Rome equaled Constantinople in the number of days devoted to fasting during Lent. In both churches, this number amounted to 36, and St. Gregory the Great testifies that such was still the discipline of his time. He says, quote, "From this present day until the joys of the Paschal solemnity there are 6 weeks, which amount to 42 days. When 6 Sundays are subtracted from abstinence, no more than 36 days remain for fasting." End quote. This Alexandrian Roman system, Zosiman tells us, spread to Egypt, Libya, Illyria, and all the churches of the West. Africa, Upper Italy, Gaul, and England adopted it. It is certain that in Milan, in the time of St. Ambrose, Saturday was not a fasting day. He says, quote, "During Lent, we fast every day except Saturday and Sunday," end quote. The Council of Agde in the year 506 requires the following, quote, "Many members of the church must fast during Lent, with the exception of Sundays, daily, including on Saturdays," end quote. Shortly thereafter, the Council of Orleans in 541 insists on the same precept, invoking the authority of the Fathers. Remarkably, this latter council forbids extending Lent, or the 40 days, to a 50 days or 60 days. Quote, "In all churches, Lent should be observed uniformly, and not in some 50-day or 60-day fast. Whoever is not sick must also fast on Saturdays of Lent. Only Sunday is excepted," end quote. Spain provides no very clear texts on the Lenten observance before the 7th century. At least St. Isidore testifies that in his time, and doubtless long before, since he appeals to tradition, Saturday was a fasting day and that 36 days were observed each Lent. The Lenten fast was not observed everywhere with the same rigor. Originally, it only allowed one meal per day, without other mitigation. But regarding the hour at which this meal was taken, the churches do not appear to have been entirely agreed. St. Basil, Epiphanius, and John Chrysostom suggest that it was permitted to break the fast only toward evening. According to Socrates, on the contrary, in some places one fasted only until about 3 o'clock. The rigor of the fast concerned not only the duration of abstinence, but also the nature of the foods permitted at each meal. The flesh of animals was absolutely forbidden. St. John Chrysostom notes that the inhabitants of Antioch likewise abstained from birds and fish. This usage was nearly universal. Nevertheless, Socrates tells us that many ate fish, and others even admitted birds to their table. Julian Primarius, master of St. Caesarius of Arles, testifies that in his circle, the same abuse had crept in, saying, quote, "Abstaining from quadrupeds, they indulge in fattened pheasants and other costly birds or fish," end quote. Regarding eggs, Socrates seems to present those who abstain from them as forming an exception, but his phrase is too ambiguous to be relied upon without reservation. By flesh or meat, the Fathers commonly understood everything that constitutes animal life, and everything that comes from it. Eggs and dairy products were evidently included under this term. In short, with rare exceptions, bread, vegetables, and salt seem to have been the diet of the faithful during primitive Lent. Even on Sunday, when one did not fast, some of them confined themselves to bread and water. The Council of Laodicea, in Canon 50, recommends fasting for all of Lent, and the Council of Trullo in 692, in Canon 56, renews the prohibition of eating eggs and dairy products. It says, quote, "We have likewise learned that in the regions of Armenia and in other places, certain people eat eggs and cheese on the Sabbaths and Lord's Day of the Holy Lent. It seems good, therefore, that the whole Church of God, which is in all the world, should follow one rule and keep the fast perfectly. And as they abstain from everything which is killed, so also should they abstain from eggs and cheese, which are the fruit and produce of those animals from which we abstain. But if any shall not observe this law, if they be clerics, let them be deposed, but if laymen, let them be cut off." End quote. The use of wine was incompatible with the fast. St. Cyril of Jerusalem, St. Basil, St. John Chrysostom, and St. Augustine attest to this explicitly. St. Augustine condemns those who, wishing to evade this law, drink instead apple juice or other sweet juices instead of wine. Holy Week, the Holy Week of Easter, was always distinguished from the rest of Lent by a stricter abstinence. The Apostolic Constitutions say, quote, "From Monday to Saturday during 6 days one must fast. The first 4 days you shall fast until 3 in the afternoon, or even until the evening, if your health permits. And when breaking the fast, you shall use only bread, salt, dried vegetables, and water. On Friday and Saturday, you shall take absolutely no food and shall break your fast only on Sunday at cock crow. If some cannot bear this trial, let them at least fast from Saturday to Sunday." End quote. Although not a precept, St. Augustine reports that many in his day attempted to reach a full 40 days without eating, and at least one man succeeded, saying, quote, "Unless perhaps someone is capable of continuing a fast for more than a week without any food taken in between, so as to approach as far as possible the 40-day fast, something we know some people have done. Indeed, we have been assured by most trustworthy brethren that someone even reached the full number of 40 days." End quote.